So would you like to introduce it, Marcus, or will I?
You're going to be introduced, or you're going to be interviewing me today because I did grief.
Yeah. So following on from our last conversation, what it came up was, this inquiry and interest around gender roles and the pressure around gender roles, because we were talking about grief, talking about, what is it like to be a man, and how men, are not supposed to cry because it's a sign of weakness, and what um, I was kind of curious to kind of ask you about how you experience gender specificity in and role modeling, and how that kind of affects you, and how you not just how you deal with it, but how you come into wholeness around it as well. Because at these conversations, it's yes, looking at the conversation of the victim story or the belief patterns that we all have, but also looking at, how in relationship to our wholeness.
Yeah. I definitely loved it, like the moment you brought it on from our last conversation, but like just the idea, like it's that hovering idea and that intensity of like, hey, you're a man, so you have very specific things that you're supposed to take care of, and it's like there's always that idea of like keeping your body in a like a level of like being, beefy, big, and like sturdy. And there's also those ideas and concepts around like you have to provide, like you automatically are hit with like you in some way you have to be able to go out on your own and provide for anybody you bring into your life, whether it's kids, whether it's the woman in your life or man in your life potentially. But like you have to provide whatever is needed, is like you have to show up for it. And the way that it always got addressed or like talked about was like men don't usually show off their emotions. They don't really embody an emotional depth of any kind. Like if you have an emotional depth, um that makes you a wuss, that makes you a pussy. Like there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. That's sort of like the entitlement that is put on you. And especially if it's like you don't engage in a way that is manly, like talking about women, uh, I don't know, talking about cars, talking about certain things doesn't make you like, if you don't talk about them, then you're not a man, or you don't have that bravado to really own who you are. And even for me, like when it came to like disseminating all that information, it was always just curious because it made no sense. Like none of it really made any sense for me personally, because all of those ideas, all of those concepts are sold to you. Like even the color blue, like for anybody who doesn't know, like blue and pink, like the primary colors that makes a man or a boy and a girl, are just made
Mm.
up. Like they were just colors that kids gravitated towards, and that was it. And they were like, okay, so this is a set way to define who you are, is boys are blue, women are pink, and this is the two sides thing again. But before that, there was this understanding that clothes weren't made a certain kind of way. Anybody who knows is like this idea that men used to actually wear dresses, like boys and stuff like that, little boys, they would run around in dresses, and so would girls, because the fashion style didn't exist um, back in like 1800s or something. Like there was no way to be specifically, and even if men wore like a certain style, women also would wear the same style, but it was usually like dresses for women and like what like I don't want to say garter belts because I know that's not the word, but like dang, what is it called? Suspenders. There we go. Suspenders and
Yeah,
pants for
a
men.
hosiery. Yeah.
All of these are just like they are what they are, as like kind of like the standardized. And that's always how I saw it too, was like nobody ever really conformed to it. Nobody was ever really comfortable in their own skin. And I sure as hell was one of those people who weren't very comfortable being like, oh yeah, you got to be a man, or you got to be a certain kind of way. You got to carry yourself a certain kind of way. And it's one of the things that really came to me not only growing up and really challenging that and really being curious about it rather than just taking it face on, was when I would cry. There were so many times in which I would cry in front of other people, and it had a weird effect on others because it was a time for me to accept my anger or when I was really scared and stuff like that. And there were people who did see me cry, and there were people who didn't. And for people who did, it was like a transformation for them too, because it allowed them to realize where they were coming from and the kind of person that they wanted to be. And this idea around like men don't cry and all of this other BS, it was a way to kind of deny that we are sensitive. Like as a man, we are sensitive, super freaking sensitive. I can tell you,
Tell me
we have our
more.
genitals hanging outside of our body, for Christ's sake. We are sensitive. You kick a certain spot in our body and we go down. There is no there is no invulnerability when it comes to men. None. There really isn't. So it was always embracing the way that I felt in any given moment and allowing myself to be open to it, which really made me whole when it came to my emotions, was just acknowledging that I have them. And that, yeah, at times I feel like I would cry forever, because that was actually something that was really holding me back when it came to expressing myself. Is like when I start crying, there's always more stuff to cry about. But it wasn't that I was like pitying or like making stuff up for me to cry about. It was always that I would just hold back so much because I don't let myself have it all the time. And that's the idea, is like men have this um, presumed air about them where they're not supposed to embrace a given part of themselves. And I definitely want to say is like when it comes to gender, it's not this idea of whether or not you play by specific rules. It's whether or not um like coming from a point of like the kybalion, where everything has a gender sort of thing. It's masculine or it's feminine. It's something that is either receptive or it's, taking action on something. And masculine is just action and feminine is just receiving. And yeah, your emotions are constantly one of those things. No matter where you are in your life, you're either receiving them or you're acting on them. So that dynamic had always been a part of my life. And for better or worse, there were moments in which I was a total asshole because I denied what was going on, or I just uh, try to muscle through it rather than just accept what was going on and actually be able to talk about it. Because action isn't always just, punching somebody when you're angry. It's also the ability to talk as well. And that hinders a lot of men, both in my own experience and myself. When I was angry, I couldn't voice it. Like it was more of like I had to do something physically in order to remove myself from it rather than just talk about it. And that was one of the hardest ones for me, because it was a point in my life where I would self-punish. So like if it was like punching a wall or punching sand or something, like physically exerting myself and physically harming myself at the same time, that's where it came to when it came to expressing myself emotionally. Young angsty teen Marcus. He was an angry lad.
Mm. But I think it is that thing. I mean, tell me more about, that moving from teenagehood as a male to, the adulthood, and it's like coming to terms with all the energy that's going on in there. And the belief patterns, you're looking towards belief patterns of how you think you should be and how one should express themselves. And because from what there's that understanding, is like, that for example, the boys don't cry. It's like even in a group of men or in a group of your friends, there's like the collective of what you should, and then going beyond that and outside of that. But you still kind of play to it because it's still there. Like you kind of still play to trying to hold back the tears and trying to not cry, or or finding just new ways to kind of like express that energy.
Yeah. Absolutely. Like when it came to like my male friends, it was always the energy had to stay high. Like even when it was like a really oppressive moment, like there had to be something that you were moving towards, like a goal or something, in order to get you to not think about it.
Mm.
And it actually brings up a lot of different things for me because I'd never really looked at it that way. But there was always times in which I was around other people, and especially like young men, because you tend to bond in high school, where the idea was that you were doing something for the sake of like building on yourself. Like I was friends with like two people who played football and stuff like that, and football in and of itself is very manly. And for him, like for the specific friend that I'm considering at the moment, like he had a lot of like built up tension when it came to like who he should be, what his responsibilities are, not only to himself but to his family and stuff like that. And you know, as it goes with people who have a zany sense of humor, you tend to find friends who have a zany sense of humor that complement it. And yeah, having that as something that I just want to explore for a bit is just there was always more to do. Like there was always like more action to take, but also when I was in high school, a lot of my friends really wanted to hang out with me because I was always the calmer one out of everybody. Like I always had that sense of like holding space and anything goes. Like a lot of people got that with me. Um, but the less I hung out with my friends and the less I was like able to like really be there as like a conduit for that ability to relax and to talk about the things that are really deep about people going through what they're going through. I got more angry, I got more resentful because I couldn't, for me it felt like I was powerless to really be there for people that I cared about because they were moving on and they were doing other things with their lives, which was the transition to me being physically angry all the time, towards myself, really, because you punch something metal and hurt yourself. Of course, you punch sand, you hurt yourself. And then transitioning into adulthood, where it's like, you know, your friends have moved away, and for me, it was like at least a good deal of the people that I knew moved into the military, or since you know we no longer went to school, it's harder to stay in contact, and everybody just split off and did their own thing. So when it came to like really maturing around not hurting myself when it came to anger was my curiosity. Like I became more curious about the world around me and wanting to explore it, wanting to open up that awareness that there's more to life than what's going on. There was also video games, which allowed me to kind of temper my own anger and find new solutions to problems that I otherwise wouldn't have. And having
Tell
that,
me a bit more about that, about the video games and how that you use that as a tool, because sometimes it's seen that boys get so engrossed in video games that it's a hindrance.
yeah, I always see that as like it's a relationship divider. It's a uh,
Yeah. How was it a tool for you? What did it do for you?
from my own experience.
Positive and negative, or whatever,
Yeah,
everything in between.
from my own experience with video games, there was always this kind of draw to experience new worlds. Like kind of the idea of video games is that you can kind of get lost. It's like reading a book. Um, so you have that ability to explore and you have that ability to open up about things that you otherwise wouldn't when it comes to video games. One of the biggest draws for me was a, a series known as Souls Like, which is really tough, but very rewarding. So it's always facing challenges and then overcoming them and feeling that relief of overcoming a challenge. So having that ability to play games and have that sense of momentum for not only yourself, but also for your character in the game, there was always like a catharsis to it because there's always a new challenge right afterwards. It wasn't that you fought one boss and it was over. It was always fighting a difficult boss, them having a very specific way of being fought and taking up that challenge and exploring the world because it's not just told to you through a linear story. You have to figure it out for yourself. So
Mm.
having that ability to be curious and to explore, and also just to be angry, but to use it as just like a, yeah, I'm angry, and not taking it personally, became a bigger part of what video games taught me. Like failure didn't become something that was really big in my life, but it always felt like it should have been bigger. But I recognize now in like hindsight that I've adapted that it's not a personal thing. When you get a setback, especially in the game that I'm talking about, when you get a setback, it doesn't mean everything's done and everything's over with and you don't get to continue. It's that you
It's
get to
not a
try
game over.
something new. Yeah.
Mm.
So it's like that ability to not give up and translate a different meaning to it became a part of my life through video games. And I also did strategy games where you had to plan it out. You had certain characters who did certain abilities, and you had to plan out where they would be and how to handle the situation. So it gave me that too, as like foresight, to have the ability to just play with all the different things that happen, but also have the foresight to recognize what you're responsible for. Because it also taught me about responsibility and about my responsibility, because nobody in a single player game loses all of their progress based on literally anything else other than their own actions. So like for the Souls games, when you lose and you die, that's based on you, like because you're the one who's in control of your character. Same thing with strategy games. Like if you don't plan ahead and you don't see the stage as for what it is and handle the threats accordingly, you're going to lose. And you have to be there in order to recognize what's going on. And if you don't, then you know, game over. You get to start again, of course, but ultimately you'll have a setback of some kind. For Souls, it's like you have to collect the stuff that works as currency so you can get stronger. For the strategy game, it's a lot of floors that you have to cover again, and they're randomized. So you won't get the same luck twice.
Mm. And what was the pitfall at that time of going to um, the game, gaming?
Hold on. What? Sorry.
Because we're talking about the like the positive effect of what going on to the games was for you. And what I hear, it was like it was you just building your resources of strategy. That's what I'm hearing. It's like it's almost like going back to the work shed or to the tool shed to kind of reconfigure and create new pathways for yourself that you could succeed if you tried or could strategize and figure it out. So it was a way in which you could build a pattern of finding ways to win when you kind of felt like you weren't winning in life.
Absolutely.
So, but it was still building a resource and a pathway for that. Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely was raised more around like fighting games and first person games. So like usually that idea of like what constitutes victory is usually how hard or how best you utilize what you got, and having that ability to make use of all your resources. So definitely video games taught me how to be creative, like even with the tools that I have and whatever is given to me. And fighting games was more of my brother's thing, which is always like challenging other people and kicking their ass. It was never my strong suit. And
yeah. Even though you were going through an angry stage, you chose not to do the fighting games.
yeah, because it would just make me more angry. It was funny because any game that was like competitive in any way, shape, or form, just it it was fun only when I made it fun, like for myself. Even when I was losing and stuff like that, competitive games taught me that like when I find the humor in like whatever the hell is going on, no matter how far I am behind in points, it was like I was allowed to receive the fact that yeah, I'm still playing a game and I can still play it my way, even if I'm losing. And one moment that comes to me like really strongly was like when my two football friends teamed up on me in a game, Halo, which is a shooting game, and you can pick teams and stuff like that. they teamed up on me and were killing me like mad. And they almost won the game until I went into a space where it was calm but angry. Like I used it as like a almost like a null zone where I hit like neutrality in myself. And I was killing them and they couldn't tell where I was going or even what I was doing because like I would just show up, I would kill them, and then I would disappear for a while, and then I would come back and I would kill them again. There was nothing they could do about it.
The
And
strategy of no pattern.
yeah, I was just, it was like the zone, I guess, which is like what it's called, because that was also something I got to experience in video games is entering the zone where I'm really calm. Like there's no, if anything, if I do feel anger or something like that, it's usually like, I'm gonna just be okay with the fact that I'm angry right now, but I'm going to kick their ass.
And just with that, just going back to our role types, and I mean, I know women play a lot of games as well, but it is predominantly, I think, more men. I obviously don't have facts and figures, but it's pretty much, it's just an assumption that men are playing more games than women. Why do you think that is?
It was
Just from
usually,
your experience.
yeah, from my own experience and from also things that I've, I guess, witnessed, is usually like that's kind of considered like a cultural divide kind of thing, where they were like, oh yeah, men, we're gonna appeal to boys first because that's where it really started. Was like, I'm gonna market my game to boys, like because they have, for better or worse, like the suggestive topic of like women who are like gladly worn both armor or just fighting clothes. That idea is just like it appeals to boys. Like that was always the idea, is like they're gonna buy the games. Like girls don't want to buy these games. And it was always in advertisements because you see like a lot of guys in advertisements when it comes to video games or even something that's game related. They've gotten more diverse over the years where it's not boys, because it's like the same
Yeah,
idea behind like
it's
board games.
it's more diverse now, but obviously it originally it was mainly catered and marketed to boys. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like the same thing that I used to see in like board games and stuff. When they would have board game layouts and stuff like that, they would always be trying to appeal to a certain, a certain side of the gender scale, whether it's masculine or feminine, because it's like they'll be the predominant one. It's like if you see a Barbie commercial, you don't see a boy in a Barbie commercial. And the same thing with like Hot Wheels. You don't necessarily see a girl, with Hot Wheel toys. And that was the
Unless
idea.
she's lying. Yeah.
Yeah. They would try to play up one side by having them show up in the advertisements and everything. And then, same thing with the other side is like, oh yeah, because this is for you, because this is who I'm targeting, versus, them being together and them targeting both.
I don't know, something that popped into my mind is like, when women get together in friendship and gathering and go kind of gather together when I know I'm just kind of putting this out there. So women can gather together where men can isolate themselves and go on the games. Is that a thing? Like as far as when you gather together with other men, do you isolate because of the we talk about emotional intelligence and how we process our emotions, and sometimes isolating, when they talk about going to the cave. I mean, women do it too in their own way. Is the pressure to be a man with other men sometimes too much? So like being on your own is like is kind of a reprieve from that.
Definitely what came up for me, not only growing up, but in my experience, is like there is like a want to bond. Like there's always that want to bond, no matter like which side you're on, masculine or feminine. And when it comes to like, yeah, masculine, there's like that kind of drive to not always engage on an emotional level. Like there's like kind of like these, I guess, bonding around like concepts or ideas more so than like emotions. Like you don't open up like as a
Would you
man.
call a friend and talk about your problems with a girlfriend?
Um, Definitely not. No, not at
Yeah,
the moment. No.
like
But
girls would definitely do that.
um, there
like,
were
hear me out. Yeah.
there were moments in which we would talk to like a certain guy friend, but usually it's in relation to like whatever their relationship is. And there were moments of that where it was like the guy who is in a relationship, he would be having his own issues, but he doesn't necessarily talk about it. But usually
Mm,
us as men, because it's not like intuition is only like one side or the other. That's not how that works.
mm,
We would usually get that there's something wrong with the relationship and talk to him, but it's usually like a double down of the guy for whatever reason. The guy will double down and just kind of not talk about it, but also just like embrace that person further and isolate themselves further. So there's
mhm.
definitely that, like when it comes to like emotional vulnerability, what to say, what not to say, and like whether or not the situation is actually going to work and work out in general.
So even just opening up a conversation to talk, an invitation to talk more openly and emotionally, it's not encouraged.
Not usually, no. Usually there's some sort of defense mechanism that like triggers and that person is ready to run. Or I've had some cases in which I could be like emotionally vulnerable with a friend that was, male. And it's usually because that person is already in that dynamic themselves where they're able to emotionally articulate. So it
So
made it
if you
easier.
if two like if you were both there at the same time in this kind of space, like both experiencing something that was triggering or emotional, if you're both at the same place, then you can kind of talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Open up more. Mm.
which is interesting because even for me, like it makes me even more curious about it because I do recognize that in the relationships that I've had in the past, and I'm still working on like actually making friends and stuff. But they mainly tend to be yeah, feminine relationships more so than masculine at the moment. But
Mm.
ultimately that doesn't mean anything because it's where I'm at, and it's also where the relationship and the emotion is going, is like being more open to that and being more open to the feminine part of myself to receive my emotions and be aware of them and be
Mm.
curious about them. And yeah, it's fascinating just like when it comes to like manly relationships. There
Do
is.
you do, just I'm kind of keep curious, being curious. Do you feel more comfortable talking to women than to men about what's going on for you, like more like emotionally, or does it seem like a sign of weakness if you talk about your emotions to women or men? Just kind of curious to see what feels more comfortable and what creates more of a flow.
um yeah, I would fall into like the stereotypical and be like, oh yeah, feminine. I like talking to women a lot better than talking to guys, but not necessarily for like uh not necessarily for all of it. Like it's kind of like
Mm,
pieces. Like
yeah.
I'll talk a lot more with those who are, more feminine, because it seems like there's more diversity in like what I would get and be able to present, but it also allows it to develop like more ideas and draw out more information for me. When it comes to like men, like if I represent myself in an emotionally vulnerable state, it's that ability to recognize that I had my own bias towards like how open I could be in a given situation, and it helps develop like imagination, like engaging imagination and getting involved with it. It's a very interesting process because I'm aware that it's more varied around like how open I am at the given moment,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of who it is. But
Mm. So it's not necessarily conditional.
yeah, it doesn't have like a precondition. I think the only ones that have precondition is like me talking to my dad, because there's several moments where my dad just like he'll funnel the conversation and then he'll close off. So
Mm-hmm.
like actually having a relationship with my dad is probably way more emotionally stressful, but it's only in allowing him to direct the flow. When he directs the flow, it cuts off and nothing
Mm-hmm.
happens. But being able to engage him and slowly open that up has rewards of itself. And I've faced many of those, and they were harrowing, but there were moments in which I had to reimagine like what the relationship would be like and not accept his ability to close off and be really scary as something that deters me from continuing or engaging in any way, shape, or
Mm.
form.
So can I ask a question around, like if I'm talking to a man and I want to engage more emotionally, like is it is it a good thing to keep prying and asking the questions, or if you're getting the kind of the shutdown that it's like that the wall's there and it's probably best not to kind of maybe that pathway isn't the right isn't appropriate for now, or like is there appreciation in kind of sometimes it's nice, like we have our defenses, we put up our wall, but we appreciate people not going, oh, that wall's not real, it's just a safety thing. And sometimes we appreciate people respecting that boundary. And sometimes we appreciate someone leaning in a bit further because they're curious and they're not as, a scary ogre as, we think we are. And, whether there's an appreciation around opening up more. And, I don't know if that's really a valid question, really, but
Valid question.
on the person sometimes, it's like, is it too obscure? Sometimes it just depends on the person. Yeah.
It's not really as obscure as you think, because again, like I've had moments with my dad where it was like I had to be on that edge of like pushing the boundary of like what I really wanted to cover or like bring him out like as like a goal, as like an end result, is like bringing the family back together, because the walls that are built up in my family are like really high, but that's only on like first glance. They're not really that high. They're very shallow, because the usually it's like, oh, I don't want to engage on that level, but it's like you have to engage on this level. And I usually have a humor about it. So it's like if you're able to engage anybody, because it doesn't just have to be masculine, because when the wall comes up, they're always going to have that kind of presence where they're like, no, I don't want to deal with it. But it's not about them. It's about serving the heart of the person. Because when it came to me and my dad, like he loves to run to his room and just close the door and tell everyone to go away. He wants to be left alone. He's very dramatic. But it gave me even more reason to step up and like push that boundary, even when it scared me to be in that place, because it wasn't just my fear that I was feeling, but it was his fear as well. It was like that intimacy.
Mm,
Intimacy isn't actually something that people are scared of. It's more that they wall off because they don't know if they're going to be accepted if they're vulnerable. Like if they're being shitty, like if they're not at their best, nobody will
mm,
love them. And that's the idea, especially like speaking of like the experience I had with my dad. It's like they want to be loved, they want to be intimate, they want to have that with another person, family member or no. And it's just they're so used to running away and nobody stepping up and just being like, okay, cut the shit. I'm still here for you. You can come out.
mm,
We're not going to play that game anymore. You've played this game and this hand and these cards way too many goddamn times. You've got to come out. And it's just that, because that's honoring both them and yourself and their heart, because honestly, as we know, as magicians, is that the heart has its own want and its will to come out. It always wants
Mm,
to come out. And it's not
mm,
something that is just like, oh yeah, one day it's here and one day it's not here. No, it's always like, I want to shine. I want to show off what I can do. I want to be here for everything that I love. And if I can't do that, then yeah, the person isolates. And that's just it. They've made an assumption around emotional vulnerability that is, usually men are seen as the toxic one, as like, that's constantly the action. We avoid the emotion that we take, which is why it's toxic masculinity, even though always the idea is like, oh yeah, this man is doing too much. No, he's doing very little in order to be present for his heart. And that's the problem, usually,
mm,
from what I see, both from myself and just being around, masculine energy itself, is like there's too much effort on trying to be a symbol of masculinity when it's not a symbol. It's just an action. It's a part of us, rather than just embracing the feminine, because there's that part of us that always denies that we're feeling something, that we're receiving something, and not always being open to receive it. So that is the part that's usually the more seen as a negative when it comes to masculine nature or to men, is that we're using our own abilities to deny what it is that we really want. Like even when it's talking to other people, women or men, it's like we don't talk about how much we want to actually have a conversation with them that is deeper than just the shallow stuff, like, oh hey, you have a nice butt, or like, I like your truck, I like your big strong arms, I'm also thinking about hitting the gym. Like those are just the ways in which we hide. It has nothing to do with whether or not we want to be emotionally available, because the same idea goes with like our own perception about what life is about. That's the same thing. It goes on internally, and it's something that is just made up bullshit. It's just a bunch of BS. It's a bunch of beliefs that don't mean shit.
mm. I yeah, loving where it's hitting right now. Um, just what came to me was like when for example you or your friends and in the masculine, when you go and talk to talk to women and women that you like, particularly, like what's usually the impetus, when you talk about protecting our emotional vulnerability, like there's a certain way we approach it as a type of protection, but what do you feel like, where do you really want to go to, what is it that you really want to ask, in that dynamic?
Oh man, when it comes to that one, it's like, first it's the building of the relationship, because you do want to have a relationship with the person. Um, but usually, even from my own experience, there's usually like a mix in communication from like how we understand what passion is. So like us feeling engaged to want to go talk to somebody, it's the part of us that finds itself trying to cannibalize itself, because it goes into the emotional range of like what we're receiving. Because the funny thing is that even though like manly men, but you engage the feminine when you approach women. Like that's kind of like that's what I've seen. Like there's a lot of receiving, like you're trying to receive a lot of information, or you do receive a lot of information, but then you choose to act differently. Like maybe you want to engage them depending on who they are. You want to engage them on a softer level. You want to compliment them or something. And instead you act like a total asshole. Like
Yeah,
there's a
there's the
misfire there
intention,
somewhere.
and then it comes out kind of different.
Yeah.
I just want to make a highlight to what you were talking about just before with your dad, and in relationship to building more intimacy. When instantly that wall comes up, and even when we're talking about when we have a desire to do something, but then the counterpart kind of comes in, the ego comes into play, or the victim story comes into play, and it's how we if we remind ourselves to serve our heart, don't serve the wall, just serve our hearts in
Yeah.
in that connection, in that dynamic. Um, Yes, I'm just kind of curious, is like, when you go and speak to someone or wanting, or do you feel like speaking to, even just approaching women, it could be a circle of friends or with someone that you are attracted to. Would you think that going to speaking to them is the direct action, or what do you feel like you need before you even approach that? And how it kind of plays out. I'm kind of just curious to kind of get to know, okay, so there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens like before there's even an approach, because I have this thing is like, if the guy's interested, he'll come and talk to me. And then because sometimes I'm too eager and I'm like jumping on the bandwagon, it's like, I got to reel it back. I got to reel it back a bit. But anyway, I'm just kind of curious to see how you, what's going on for you.
When it comes to talking, because I've actually done this a few times already, actually, when it was like talking to women, is like I have like two female neighbors, and I ended up talking to them because they're, it's a married couple. And the impetus for that and the push for that was just to talk about spirituality and like my journey so far. And that was it. Like, I wanted to like know them and stuff like that, but through the conversation, I was actually able to get like one of their numbers. I've talked to them. They've come over for dinner at least once, and had a beautiful time. And they've just been busy for the last like couple of weeks. Really burnt out because their jobs take a lot, because all physical jobs have that. So like it's still gauging the relationship and where it's going, but that was the draw, was just to talk, and like whatever the hell came up, I was just swept up in and I went with it, and it was just curiosity. I ended up talking to a woman at Walmart because I danced for her and like sang a bit of like what she was singing to her son, because she was engaging her son while backing up her cart at a Walmart. And that was the conversation, was just like that short start, and then we would smile at each other because we ran into each other multiple times in the Walmart. And then eventually when she was leaving, I approached her and told her that she has a beautiful heart, because that was the draw. Like, it had nothing to do with anything else. It was just like, you want to express yourself in a certain kind of way to this person, and it's just a reflection of like that. And that's what I've seen. Like, that's what I've become to realize. I've seen also, in my own way, I'll cover it because it is kind of taboo, is always like the idea that men get hard staring at a wall. That idea, I've actually realized that it's reciprocal energy. Like, there is an interest in you that is intimate, and that you can have that urge, but it has nothing to do with what it seems like. And it has a lot to do with that intimacy and growing on a level that's more internal and more about delivering information and being open to delivering information to another person, like sharing your experiences, being more emotionally vulnerable with a person. It has nothing to do with having to have sex with that person, but that's usually the message that gets messed up. I'll tell you that one. Is like, you feel intimate about engaging the opposite sex, and then you're just like, you're trying to make sense of it at the same time before approaching, which messes up the signals. So you might become more receptive when you should be more physically active, and you are more physically active when you should be more receptive of what's going on. So when men go to like relate or to give whatever is going on inside of them the push start and the engagement that is required, usually it's about getting up in your head first, trying to figure out what you're going to say because you're drawn to this person.
What are you going for in this situation?
What the hell do I want? I'm just feeling this and I don't know what the fuck is going on. That's the confusion, and that's what ultimately destroys or makes it more problematic trying to engage and gain traction in talking to the opposite sex. Usually is like, you feel it. It's just like intuition, and how we trained in intuition. It's the first thing you get, but there's again that part of you, the ego, that's like jumps on the bandwagon and starts trying to make sense of what the fuck you're getting. And that's the problem, is like that's what gets in the way of like whether you're going to act or not, whether you're going to be receptive or not. It's, I feel bad, man. They don't have the training, so they don't see it as just a message that you want to convey to another person. It might be like, hey, you're beautiful. And like, I would love to like go out and just talk to you for a little bit. And like, even if I don't see you again, that's all I wanted. I wanted that intimacy of having a conversation and just let that be what it is.
Yeah.
Or maybe you want a hug from that person. Who knows? Who, honestly, who knows? The message could be
Yeah.
anything.
It's
But
interesting that impetus to reach out to someone and the self to be self-expressed, and yet the messages get mixed because it's like we get what we get, and then we're like, hang on a minute, I can't say that, or I can't do that because that's going to mean ABC,
yeah,
a whole bunch of things, and so the message gets mixed, and even in the receiving it gets mixed. Like if someone approaches, for example, for me, like even like an ounce of kindness, I'm like, I'm in love with that person already. Like, it's like, well, but where am I? I don't even know this. I'm not even like the trajectory in which what it means kind of really just like goes off like a wild horse without actually staying in the reality of where it is, or just appreciating for what it is in the gift in the moment. So yeah, that's yeah, it's really funny how that just totally happens a lot
absolutely.
in first engagements, and just wanting to I think as a single person, because when you're with someone there's always that person that you bounce something off. As a single person in the world, like you're waiting in Walmart, you're meeting and greeting, seeing people all the time, and there is a joy in wanting to connect in some way, but it's not like it's always sexual. It's not like it's sexual. I mean, sure, there might be something going on there, but it's not, even though it comes in, it's not where you want to start off. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just like what you said, the desire to be intimate and to make a connection and be curious, and yeah. And it's what we get, so we want to give it, but then it's gets messed up and lost in translation.
Yeah, it's so funny because like at the time of like actually experiencing it, and I'm glad this was a concept, or this was the next theme that we covered, was because of that. Because like the moment I stepped into it, and it's like, man, yeah, there's a lot of stuff around that relationship with being a man and relating and all of this other stuff. It's like, but you still have the ego and stuff that will play defender against the information you're getting. So like, of course, it's going to be confusing until you look at it yourself and you have like an understanding of like, oh, so me getting hard staring at a wall wasn't about me being hard and staring at a wall. Like that wall didn't instantly become sexy for me. Like that didn't happen. It's the same thing with like every interaction that you have with other people. Like you might smile and like really feel joy for like that person, but it's again like ego isn't always blocking. That's the other thing too, right? Is like ego isn't always blocking your greatness. Your greatness can be pouring out of you and you just don't realize it. So that's why other people can all of a sudden want to engage with you, because they want to engage that part of themselves as well, because it's receptive. Like that's the greatest receptivity you have, is being in the unknown of things and being open and just exploring the world in your greatness and everything that you are, like everything you came here to be. So like having that engagement, being aware that like this person really wants to be intimate with somebody, like it's information. We're always getting the information that's valid, that's up to date, that's what we need to know. And the same thing, guys or gals, we have the same thing. That's the same thing that's going on. Is just, again, it can get lost in translation because again, we have a defender that's always trying to protect us from getting hurt, but that ultimately gets us hurt. It's listening to the defender instead of the original message.
Keeps it separate, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what would you say, like, just to kind of bring it up and over the crest of the conversation, what are some other, because the overall theme is around the taboos of like we're talking about masculine gender today, and the pressure and the stereotypes around that, and the taboos to be a certain way, and the taboo to do something else, like in around desire. Or I'm just kind of, the invitation is like, what else has come up for you around this topic of what you should be as a man, to how you are and how you want to express yourself, and how that is incongruent to the stereotype, or the typical, or totally on point. And it's like, to really lean into it is like, oh, I want to lean into it, but it feels like it's full on, it's too much or too something, you know.
Yeah, definitely for me, like what came up like really strong as you were building it is like that idea of owning and being really responsible to how I approach a situation. Because ultimately, when it comes to like masculine or feminine, male or female, like that dynamic is about whether or not you're going to be, whether or not you're going to petrify yourself by continuing to believe that these things have any value. Like, oh, a man has to be manly, you don't cry, all of that other stuff. It's like you can lean into that and recognize that it's just a story. And that's definitely what I do. It's just a story. I can cry whenever I want. I can bawl like a baby whenever I want. And I'm proud of it. But it's owning it. And even if it's something that's not even true for you, it's just, okay, it could happen. That could be who I am. That's the symbol of manhood. But I found the more that I was just okay with like wherever I was as being a man, whatever that attitude is, which definitely my attitude is, as long as I get to own my heart and be with my heart, then all of those other things will fall into place for themselves. And having that opportunity and having that energy about it changed the way that I see, first of all, getting into contact with the opposite sex has been a lot easier because it's like whatever wants to be present in that relationship, whatever starts that fire, whatever it is, it's going to continue to feed me information instead of me having to try to make sense of whatever is going on. Because I don't know that person from a sheet of paper or a slice of bread. I don't know who they are. And I'm not here to project what I want onto another person. I'm here to be open to my heart and stay curious as to who I'm going to be and who I want to be moving forward. And that's what I serve. Like, even when it's choices, even when it's other things that I want to say, there's always going to be a push and information that comes back that allows me to continue to navigate the world, because it's too small to just be a man in this world. It's because it's such
too
a small
to just be a man.
Yeah, even if it's like, even if I was the opposite sex, it's too small to just be a woman. Like, the box you're constrained to is way too small and way too separate from everything else that you are. So it's like one of those boxes you can appreciate, but ultimately it's a box. That's what I get out of it.
Love that. Love that you've come to that.
The teeny tiny box. Who wants to be in a teeny tiny box when you are the ocean of possibilities? Stars, even.
Thanks, Marcus. That it was really good to have that kind of unpack, and even where there's many different ways of being in the world, and yeah, just to kind of continue to share that, because it's still the ways in which we relate. It's part of living. It's part of how we do life. And even though it kind of sounds a bit childish to do the kind of boy girl thing, but it still plays out. It's still with us, you know.
Absolutely.
And we can continue to have a conversation with it, you know. I think it's really important.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing up this topic. It was really fun. I'm looking forward to your shares because I'm interested.
Ask me whatever question you want.
I'm thinking about those questions now.
Write them down throughout the week.
Oh, they'll come to me. They'll come to me in the middle of the conversation.
Great.
All the love, Kathleen.
You too.